Hello and welcome to 25 Concepts in Anthropology, where I, Nick Herriman, take you through what I think are the top 25 concepts in anthropology. Each of these concepts provides a unique way with which to understand the world and what it is to be human. Today I'm going to look at the concept of community and society. Society is famously known as Gesellschaft and community as Gemeinschaft. This comes from the German scholar by the name of Tönnies. What do these words mean? Well, society in Gesellschaft refers to a form of human organisation, a social order if you like, that is based around written laws. The other kind of social order is community or Gemeinschaft, and this is based around tradition and spoken mores and spoken ways. So one social order we'll call society or Gesellschaft, and that's based around laws. The other social order we'll call community or Gemeinschaft, and that's based around tradition and spoken mores. Now, if we look at Gesellschaft or society for the meantime, the form of authority in society is a state, typically, a bureaucratic organisation which regulates and administers citizens' rights and interests. That's the major form of authority in society. By contrast, in community, authority is far more diffuse. It might be, for example, the local elders or the priests. Society, so you might have guessed already, is a form of social order which develops particularly in the West from about 1800. By contrast, community predates the modern era. The other distinction we could make is that society has tended to predominate in urban areas. By contrast, community has tended to predominate in rural areas. Now, within society, there is another form of society which we call civil society. So if you like, in Gesellschaft, society that is, there's another form of society which is called civil society, and this is a combination of like political parties, the media and press, unions, NGOs, etc. And these are thought ideally to provide some form of political representation for the citizens and is a kind of counterweight to that of the state. That's society. What about community? The basis of community, basis of social organisation in community is kinship and locality. What I mean is your relationship with your uncles and cousins, etc., and also your relationship with your neighbours. Now, another interesting phenomenon, or another interesting factor in society is the development of the idea of nation. As we understand it, the modern nation is a relatively new concept. We can find biblical references to a nation of Israel, etc. But the modern sense of a nation, that is, a group of citizens whose rights and obligations are administered by a state whose power is counterweighed by that of civil society, is a very new idea, and nation is part of that. As Benedict famously wrote, a nation is an imagined community. In other words, I'm Australian and I will never be able to meet everybody in Australia. I have to some extent, imagine them. And Benedict Anderson argues that there were certain factors associated with modernity that allowed the development of this idea of nation. An idea that's very important to me and probably very important to you. It's probably one of the most taking ideas, the most captivating ideas of modernity. By contrast, in community, typically we meet everybody in the community. It can be imagined, we can imagine the whole village, for example, or the whole clan, but we can also meet everybody in the village, meet everybody in the clan. We can know them on a face-to-face basis. So that's another big difference between society or Gesellschaft on the one hand and community or Gemeinschaft on the other hand. as I've already hinted, in society, the basis of society is the individual citizen, who has bonds which are legalistic. They're moderated by the state. So if your car crashes into me, you and me don't fight directly. We fight, if you like, via a state. Now, that's our relationship, if you like, is mediated by the state. In community, it's different. There are personal bonds. We have to come together, sync together as kin, family in some way or another. Now, at the very basis, if you like, society, this modern social order that's only developed really from about 1800 onwards, is based around mass economy. And typically that mass economy takes the form of capitalism. By contrast, in Gemeinschaft or community, the basic economic relationship is one of reciprocity, which is where we exchange things face to face and not via a market. So if you like, economically, you, the listener, and I are economically connected through a market. Now, if you and I lived in a community, our relationship would be direct, unmediated by a market, and based on principles of reciprocity. They're the basic outlines of society and community. If you're watching this, I'm guessing you probably live in society, so you're quite familiar with it. If you live in a community, you know there are different kinds of forms. As I mentioned already, there's clan, there's also caste, and most famously is village community. Now, these two concepts, society and community, have been very useful, particularly from about 1900 to 1950, because there was a division of labour. Sociology focused on society, while anthropology took as its proper object of discussion to be community. So sociology was society, anthropology was community. That's up to about, let's say, the mid-20th century, so around about 1950, up to that point. After then, a lot of famous anthropologists, foremost amongst them Gerth, became interested in developmental anthropology, the anthropology of development. And basically what they were trying to chart was the societies which they were doing participant observation fieldwork. They were trying to chart the transition from community to society, from tradition to rational thought, from magical beliefs to a sort of religious beliefs. They sort of saw themselves as tracking this path from ritual to, let's say, scientific action, from community to society. So this is sort of became popular in the 1950s and the 1960s. Following that, from the 1970s on, the whole idea of community and particularly tradition becomes heavily criticised, and this criticism is associated with post-structuralism. In other words, post-structuralist authors challenged us, and they said the idea that anthropology has created of a static community, timeless, at peace with itself, that living in tradition, post-structuralism said, no, this is just a fiction that's been created by anthropologists. And to some extent that's true. Some of the things that we thought of as traditional were in fact things that have been a product of the modern era. Nevertheless, the distinction is still quite useful, I believe. There are two ways in which you can see it's useful. One, in the nation in which I do field work, which is Indonesia, you can see a phenomenon which is sometimes called the urban village. What that means is that in parts of this huge megapolis, this huge city, there are little, they call them kampung in Indonesian, which means something like compounds. So it'll be a compound with a lot of people from the village where I did fieldwork, and they will go back and forward from my fieldwork village to the capital city and back, to the capital city and back. And while they're in the capital city, they'll stay with people from my fieldwork village too, or let's say more generally my fieldwork area. So I can go to the capital city and meet with them and kind of live a village life in the city. And that's in fact what they do. They live, if you like, a community or Gemeinschaft style life in the city. And this is interesting for us as anthropologists, because we assume that the society would predominate, that the social order called society would predominate in urban areas. And I still think the idea is very useful in parts of the world which are supposedly modern or Western. In many parts of rural Australia, for example, social relations are easily analysed in relation to community. And so, particularly in rural areas, we can see community as a form of social order still affecting people in their everyday lives. And this is why I think this distinction between community and society is a very useful one and provides us with a unique insight into what it is to be human. Stay tuned for more concepts in anthropology.